I'm not so tall. But I was born on a Sunday. And while my mom was laboring at Sherman Hospital, and my dad was at the second annual Village of Hampshire Vintage Car Show, the fine people of First Assembly of God were praying. And after service, Pastor came to the hospital to pray for my mom and to bless me. Holding me in his arms, he said, "Well, I do declare, this baby reminds me of Dom DeLuise." Eventually, Dad came to the hospital and held me too. And with teary eyes, he looked at Mom with pride and said, "Look at our special boy." And Mom fell in love with him all over again. Dad was a charmer. And he was the life of every party because he was at every party. But kids and parties don't mix. And both he and Mom made their choices. Him, the party. Mom, to raise me and eventually my little sister. Alone with 2 kids, Mom found support and purpose within the church. She found a community to help with us kids as she put herself through nursing school and eventually law school. Yeah, she's an incredible woman. I loved my church. First Assembly of God was a brutalist nightmare, a concrete cube running over with the love of Christ. We were good Pentecostals, and we loved singing. Some Sundays, even Dad would sneak in to nurse a hangover in the back pew. Mom would invite him to sit with us, and he'd say he liked the music. And after singing, Pastor would preach his 2 favorite topics, speaking in tongues and the apocalypse. With lots of complicated charts, he would predict the end of the world. You see, the Hebrew text speaks of a bear of the north, obviously Russia. Despite at this time the Cold War being over, and Revelation speaks of dragons, which obviously represents China. Don't mind the not so implicit racism. And of course, America had a special place in Jesus' plans, so long as we continued to support the modern nation state of Israel. These are not fringe beliefs. Pentecostalism is the fastest growing sect of Christianity in the world. And the world includes Congress and the White House. Pentecostalism directly influences American public policies right now. And each week, after the sermon, an airy keyboard would begin playing, and we would be called to the altar to get saved and to get tongues. When I was only 8, I knelt at the altar and the pastor prophesied over me, a Shamalama, Hyundai, Elantra, Hibatchi. Oh yes, Lord, we bless you this day. Shamalama, Hyundai, Elantra, Hibatchi. Yes, Lord. I do declare, this boy will serve you as a pastor, a mighty man of righteousness, Shamalama, Hibatchi. And he anointed my head with oil. Again, I was 8 years old, and declared me God's special boy, born to be a pastor. The only problem was I didn't speak in tongues. Each Sunday, my hands would shake and my chest would tighten as I begged God to give me tongues. And every Sunday I left disappointed. But when Pastor would preach on Revelation, I would listen. I had to know when the rapture would happen because as pastor preached, you got to speak in tongues because Revelation says Jesus is coming. Get to this altar and pray. I would do as I was told, and nothing would happen. After one service, pastor pulled me aside and said, "Son, you got to speak in tongues if you're gonna be a pastor. Tell your mom you're going to Camp Carlinville." At Camp Carlinville, everybody spoke in tongues. Camp Garlandville was holy ground. At Camp Carlinville, my dad pledged to get sober, and pastor baptized him in the lake. God had forgiven Dad, and Dad had forgiven Dad. And for a while, Dad even started to get us on every other weekend. If God could do that for Dad at Camp Carlinville, then surely he would give me tongues. A hayride and bonfire with s'mores were planned for the last night of camp for after chapel. But chapel wouldn't end until the Holy Spirit gave everybody tongues. And the airy keyboard started playing, and I felt Jesus telling me to come and get tongues. I joined hundreds of other kids at the altar to pray and pray and pray. And one by one, the other kids got tongues and left for a hayride, a bonfire, and s'mores. Soon the chapel emptied. Only me and my camp counselor were there. My hands started to shake and my chest tightened. Sobbing, I tried to ask the counselor why God didn't love me. And it came out in heaving monosyllables, which is kind of what speaking in tongues sound like. And with joyful tears in his eyes, my counselor declared he got the gift. But I had not got the gift, and the hayride was already over. Still, even without getting tongues, pastor's prophecy came true. I actually grew up to be a pastor. I started as an assistant pastor at the church where I met my wife. And our son was born almost a year to the day later. And holding my wife's hand as she delivered, I could all but hear heavenly choirs sing, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given." And afterwards, we received visitors with gift from our church family. Even my dad rode his motorcycle across the country like a magi for the first of the 3 times he has ever met my son. And eventually I took the leap from assistant pastor to lead pastor. Yeah. The hiring committee at the church I was interviewing at was led by the deacon, a big man with a big personality and an even bigger checkbook. And what he said was gospel. In the interviews, we discovered we had both grown up at Pentecostal churches. In fact, he told me, he still spoke in tongues, even though this new church was not Pentecostal. But that would change if the deacon had his way, he said. I kept it to myself that I didn't ever get tongues because I really wanted the job. And the deacon championed for me to be pastor, and the congregation overwhelmingly voted yes. I agree. After getting hired, my family, 2 kids now, rented the other side of a duplex, and our neighbors became our closest partners in God's work. The duplex, we had an open door policy. We'd set up folding tables and folding chairs in the driveway for daily cookouts. Whoever wanted could come and feast with us. And all sorts of people came. People with developmental disabilities, young people, old people, queer people, straight people, homeless, rich, independents, Democrats, even Republicans. Everybody was welcome. And then COVID happened. And the meals stopped. And the ministry became daily Zoom prayer meetings, which are the worst kind of Zoom meetings. And those Zoom meetings became church members arguing about whether the government was oppressing us. But as a leader, I insisted that we take COVID seriously. And so we did online services. And we did social distancing. No singing. Everyone has to wear a mask. And in protest, the deacon pulled me aside and said, "Pastor, you're a coward." The next few months, our once very pleasant relationship fell apart. And then the Sunday after the 2020 election, the deacon stopped me before service, right before service, and he squeezed my shoulder and said, "Joe Biden did not win this election, and you will not pray for him." And he was right. I was a coward because I did what I was told. Ashamed, I've resolved myself then to stand for truth and reason. I vowed that in a polarized world, we would be a community of welcome. We would be gentle and kind. And the deacon took his big personality and his even bigger checkbook to a different church. And I was angry. And I was afraid for our church's future. So to distract myself, I got on Facebook. And I saw my dad post something very racist. And though it had been years since we last talked, I thought, I'll blow off some steam and call Dad. And there have been more productive conversations. Somehow, towards the end of our call, he blamed my mom for our lack of a relationship. And I snapped, and I told him who was actually at fault. And he said, "You have to forgive me. You're a pastor." And we don't talk anymore. 2 nights before the inauguration, my family and I went up to my mom's to spend the night. And we sat around speculating how things would improve under the new administration. And all the pressure that had been building in our country and in our church had also been building in my duplex. My neighbor and I, we used to tease each other about our differing politics. But things changed after the election. So it was nice to get away. After the kids went down, my phone lit up with a push notification from the baby monitor back home. There was a man in their room. The logo of his Nike hoodie glowed on the camera. After calling the cops, I called my neighbor to warn him, "Hey man, there's a guy in our house, and I know you're leaving for work soon, so be careful." "What do you mean there's a guy in our house?" "I don't know. Someone broke in. The cops are on their way." And when the cops showed up, my neighbor assisted their investigation, and the cops couldn't find anybody. But as they were leaving, they saw a Nike hoodie in the back of his car, and they cuffed him. But since loving your neighbors, even when they're your enemy, is the Christian thing to do, we didn't press charges. WWJD. His family left the church. He and his wife got a divorce. And the last I heard is he has a new wife, a new kid, and a new church God forgave him, and he had forgiven himself. As pressures kept building, I began to blame myself for white evangelicalism's complicity in the MAGA movement. And because of that movement, pastors, some that I knew, some that I didn't, were rightfully being revealed as bullies, con men, and sexual predators. And I started to think about the transitive property. You guys remember 8th grade math, or 6th grade math? I don't remember. These MAGA pastors were bad. Therefore, all pastors were bad. I'm a pastor. Therefore, I am bad. And I started to spiral. And at the same time, we were transitioning my son from COVID homeschooling into public school, and it wasn't going well. And he was struggling. And I think he got caught in my spiral. And he started experiencing really dark and scary thoughts. And I had nothing to say that could help him. And one Sunday, as church was letting out, my hand started shaking again. And the shaking, it moved into my chest. I stopped being able to breathe, and I felt like my head was going to collapse. And alone in the chapel, I cried out to God, who had nothing to say to help. And for the next 3 months, the panic attacks happened daily. One panic attack happened in a church board meeting. And the chairwoman noticed, and she asked, "Pastor, are you okay?" And it was at that moment that I decided to be honest, and I broke down. And they sent me on a sabbatical, which included going to Christian camp, hosting a spiritual retreat meant to refresh pastors, and one of the camp counselors, another pastor just trying to help, asked, "Do you have a father wound? Do you have a daddy hole in your heart?" And I thought, do these people not know that maybe in this moment, pastors shouldn't be saying, "Get tongues and daddy holes"? I just said no. I hadn't considered that. And then after my sabbatical, I decided that I would finally preach on the book of Revelation, which is not actually about the end of the world. The word apocalypse literally just means to reveal. Revelation is weird because it reveals its message in the same way as political satire. Like, we all understand that this elephant in a red hat is not a literal elephant in a red hat. It's a fucking fascist. But 2,000 years from now, that might not be so clear. In the same way, the book of Revelation, it mocks powerful rulers who use religion, money, and sex to violently oppress people. Revelation reveals that the natural end of religious fanaticism, militarism, sexual violence, and xenophobia is destruction. But beyond these things is a city whose open borders and a feast are set for anyone who will come. And for 18 Sundays in a row, I said that. The church closed last summer, and I'm not a pastor anymore. I've reached the reasonable middle of my life, and the thing that I was born to do, I no longer do. And I don't actually know what I'm supposed to do anymore. Like, I still believe in something, but most Sundays I don't go to church. And instead I take my son to Rubik's Cube competitions. And I cheer for my special boy in folding chairs as uncomfortable as pews. And when I do go to church, God has nothing to say. And my hands start shaking and my chest tightens.